About 35 years ago, a former lieutenant in the South Vietnam Air Force embarked on a very dangerous journey as he entered a small crowded boat in search of a peaceful land for him and his family. He was leaving on a Friday, which also happened to be the 13th day of the month. Of course, for superstitious Australians, this would not have been considered a very good day to leave on such a dangerous voyage. Before this man, to give in to such a superstition was not an option. So he set out with his companions. Friday the 13th turned out to be a lucky day for him, because rather than meeting pirate ships on the way down the sea, which would have meant almost certain death, they encountered a Malaysian fishing boat that was able to tow them to a refugee camp in Malaysia. It was from there that Australia extended its arms to him, and his application for asylum was accepted. This man, of course, was my father. He was one of the lucky ones. He was lucky because he found a country at the time with a people that was generous and welcoming to him. However, not all refugees and migrants have had the same experience. Some have died on their journey in search of a better place, while others have suffered greatly in other ways without gaining the peaceful life that they seek. The second reading today asks us to have the same mind as Jesus Christ. That is, as Christians, to have the mind of Christ means that we are called to be united in love, with the attitude that life is not just about us, is not just about individualism, but also about our consideration for others' welfare as well. So on this World Migrant and Refugee Sunday, we are called to consider the most vulnerable members of our world. We are reminded of our responsibility that in following Christ, we must respect all life, from the moments of conception in the womb to the end of natural life. So today's gospel gets us to reflect upon this possible disparity that can exist between our words and our actions, between our profession of faith and the living out of that faith. We can be like the son in today's gospel who says yes to the call to work in the Lord's vineyard to protect the vulnerable, but then chooses not to do anything about it. Or perhaps we are more like the other son who has been resistant to such an idea all along, but then comes a point where he becomes more open to promoting life at all stages. So regardless of whichever category we may belong to, both the first reading and the gospel this evening tells us that it's never too late for us to accept God's invitation to make a difference in his vineyard. Of course, working in the Lord's vineyard essentially requires two important components, two important ingredients that we should consider. Firstly, it requires us to recognize the inalienable dignity of every human being as being created by God for his special purpose. As Pope Francis underscores in his message for the World Day of Migrants and Refugees this year, he says that we must not consider a migrant or refugee only as part of a statistic, but as a real person. Each of these people cannot be considered as simply a number to be processed, but a person with a dignity that cannot be taken away regardless of his or her circumstances in life. Then secondly, we should view everyone as being interconnected, because every human person originated from God, who is the giver of all life. And therefore, every person forms a part of the human family, stemming from the one Creator who has created each individual out of his own goodness to reflect his image and likeness. We heard St. Paul say in today's second reading, if our life in Christ means anything at all, then we should be united in our love and our convictions, with a common purpose and a common mind. So I think what this appeals to is essentially the common good of all, the common good that we should apply to every single person, because it's the good of every single person. So the common good is not something that we sort of add up and say it's all good, but it's something that's good for every single person. So today's gospel essentially tells us that in the end of the day, how we live our lives will show others what we believe. It's our actions that will show forth our faith the most. What my father experienced was something of the goodness of God that has eventually led me to this point in my life. So may we also all reflect this goodness of God in one way or another in the way that we live our lives, when we come to work in the Lord's vineyard to protect the life of the most vulnerable in our world.